Good afternoon, everybody. We're delighted to welcome you to the second episode of the Property Marketing Lounge. For those that didn't join us last time, the Lounge is a sub-brand of the Property Marketing Strategists to help share insight, support, collaborate and encourage networking across PBSA, student accommodation, co-living and build to rent. As we said before, classification of the sector as a whole is probably another session, so it is on the list for us to get to. Thank you very much to Risuma for sponsoring. Risuma are a student accommodation online marketplace who are giving the consumer the tools to make better informed decisions on their accommodation choices. Be sure to look them up and the link will be in the chat as well. Our mission is to elevate marketing in property, as our experiences have led us to believe that marketing is not always able to deliver real value, and it could due to a lack of voice, influence and engagement across the business, and we want to set out to change that. We have lots of exciting webinars scheduled with a wide range of experts from the likes of Michelle Carvell, Rebecca O'Hare, Paddy Allen and more. Please sign up to the mailing list or drop us an email to keep us up to date.
Thanks, Sarah. So back in October, Sarah and I kind of discussed our hunches around why we both had similar frustrations and experience around brand and brand engagement and engaging the team across our careers. But we wanted to be quite clear about why this was and try and evidence what the problem was so that we could help other people in our positions to solve it. And that's when the Property Marketing Survey was born. And its findings about brand is what kind of really provoked the webinar to today and the discussion we're going to have. What we discovered was that marketeers believe brand to be one thing, and our non-marketeers, which largely most of them are senior leaders, discussed brand as a different thing altogether. And we found that 20% of those non-marketeers believed brand was unimportant. We don't know the answers as to why that is. Maybe senior leaders are right in that brand should be viewed differently in property, or are marketers to blame that we're not really kind of engaging and communicating effectively what brand is? Or is it because another problem that we have in the sector is there's not as many senior leaders in marketing as you would expect or would like to have? So we had lots of questions, which we hope we're going to delve into today to discuss them. We encourage you to ask questions, so if you've got any questions, please use the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. We'll monitor the chat as well, but we can't promise that we get those to our panelists. And over to you, Sarah.
So we are delighted to be joined by experts today. We have Soraya Caminello from Nido Student, Graham Bates from Live Group, Simon Lucy from Hype Collective and Ted Holden from Holden's. We're going to do a quick roundup of our virtual, very socially distanced sofa so that our guests can introduce themselves. So over to you, Graham.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here and thank you for inviting me. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Graham Bates. I am the co-founder of Live Group. We were one of the very first operators and consultancies to come into the build-to-rent sector. Indeed, going so far back that when we started, the term build-to-rent hadn't even been coined, so that makes me feel quite old. I am also the co-founder of Fika Interiors, which is a specialist interiors and furniture supply business for the build-to-rent sector. So I've been in and around marketing in different businesses all my career, and hope today I'll be able to bring a slant on things from a build-to-rent perspective.
Thanks, Graham. Simon.
Hi everyone, yeah, thanks so much for having me. So I'm Simon, founder of Hype Collective. We are a student marketing agency, so our specialism is helping brands that want to target 16 to 25-year-olds in the UK. We work across all sorts of sectors, from graduate employers, recruiting social workers, all the way through to Co-op, Adobe, Love Honey, so we do loads of sex toys. All sorts of things, and I think probably where I most value is just kind of comparing and contrasting what's happening in the in this sector to what's happening in other spaces and how they're targeting students.
Thank you. Soraya.
So I'm Soraya Caminello. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Nido Student. I've been at Nido for about 3 years, so we're a purpose-built student accommodation provider and operator. We've expanded quite rapidly in the last year, so we're now kind of operating in 3 countries. We've got about 10,000 beds under operation. and we're looking to expand further. Prior to Nido, I was at Aparto, and prior to that at the Student Housing Company, but working in marketing overall for about 11 years now.
Thanks, Soraya. And Ted?
Hi everyone, I'm Ted Holden, and sorry, my cat has just decided to join me, typical timing on a Zoom call. I'm co-founder of Holden's. We're a full-service creative agency, but we specialise in branding specifically, as well as digital marketing and immersive technology. So we've been working in property and placemaking for a number of years now, as well as other sectors, including leisure and tourism, arts and culture. So yeah, that's us.
Fantastic, thanks everybody. So on to the discussion. So we're going to target this head on. What does brand mean to you? Let's start with Graham.
Okay. I mean, for me, it's about customer experience in a nutshell, and specifically relating to build to rent. You know, we talk a lot about, certainly with our business, about resident first living, about creating great experiences for people. So it's also about what it isn't. Brand runs far deeper than just the name on the building and the logo. And we were talking about that, weren't we, a little earlier before we joined the webinar. So, I think a lot of people who are non-marketers, don't think beyond the logo, don't think beyond the name, but it really is about, the depth of what is the offer, what is what are the benefits to people. I think, people are much more sophisticated today. They want to know what it is that they're getting. And, I've always had the mantra that people don't buy products and services. They buy the benefits that they believe that those products and services are going to bring them. And it's just the same whether you're living in a student property or whether you're living in a build to rent property. What are the benefits of me being here? So creating a brand that really demonstrates the benefits and demonstrates a great experience, that's what it's about for me.
Thanks, Graham. Soraya, would you agree, coming from a kind of similar B2C market?
Yeah, completely agree. I think it's about the experience, but it's also allows us to articulate the purpose of our business, right? The why we do what we do. And that's not only to our customers, but it's also to our employees. The brand also, motivates your employees, it empowers them. It allows them to identify with the business. And when you're doing that, that kind of will essentially transmit through to your customers as well. So it's a big piece. So it's, of course, it's the visual identity, it's the verbal, it's how we communicate, our tone of voice, it's the physical, how our buildings look and feel, it's the service that we provide, it's the delivery, it's the operational delivery, it's how that's done. And it's the values which drive through, and those values have to kind of align to our audiences and allow them to identify with us and what we do. So yeah, it's definitely about the experience and driving that connection with our customers.
Ted, you're obviously coming at it from a slightly different angle, more from the kind of the creative side of things. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I totally agree with what's just been said. I think that's kind of summed it up in a nutshell for me as well, because it's all about the brand experience. I always think of the customer experience and the brand experience as being very much two sides of the same coin. And it's all underpinned by, first and foremost, the values of the brand that the audience should be able to really connect with. And that kind of underpins everything. But then the visual identity, the brand identity, the logo is just one visual expression of the brand. And it's just one way that customers are going to experience it. So for me, brand is totally about all those micro customer experiences that they have. And that could be anywhere. That could be online, it could be in the building. And as you say, it's, the experience that customer has of the service itself and the product itself. It's all about brand and customer experience. So from our perspective, creating a brand for a development is about getting to the heart of what that experience is going to be, and then creating a genuine and authentic personality that rolls out across every touch point.
Thanks, Ted. And Simon, you're coming from sort of out a much kind of wider perspective probably than some of the rest of us. What's your view on what brand means to you?
Yes, I think I agree with everything that's been said. I think the only thing that I could add is it doesn't have to be absolutely everything. I think like oh god, I'm going to quote Jeff Bezos, but I think he said it's like what your brand is what people say when you're not in the room, basically behind your back. And so I think if you look at certain household names, they've picked certain items that are their brand. So Amazon, it is look and feel, packaging. Sorry, Apple, it would be look and feel and packaging. For Amazon, it's the convenience, and that's the thing that I would say, maybe the evilness, I'm not sure. But I think you don't, as a marketeer, especially if you aren't a huge organization, you'll look at everything we've said and be like, oh my God, where do we start? But actually you need to pick out which bit is going to be the bit that you hang your hat on and say, that's the bit that we do better than everyone else. And I think people get a bit daunted by the discussion of brand, basically.
I think brands help you to differentiate, don't they? And like you've just said then, what's the bit that, is different to, what everybody else is doing. And I think that, one of the issues that we have in the property sector, and certainly it's still an issue in the build to rent sector, is there's a lot of talk about brand, but actually a lot of lip service really as well. And people don't start soon enough thinking about it. If we're, working with a client, we'll be talking to them about, starting to, create some brand awareness, at the point that hoardings are going up, before a digger has gone in the ground on a building, and, starting to create some noise, getting some awareness. And, nobody in the build to rent sector, for example, has done that more successfully than Moda, who were, shouting about their brand, several years before they actually opened a building, really. And by the time that they did open the building, they felt like an established player, in their particular, local market. And I think that's a very good example of how you can win, if you start soon enough. But I think we've got to encourage this to have people spend more time, thinking about the difference this can make to their businesses and their buildings.
Have any of you noticed any significant changes in attitudes to brand over, say, the last 5-10 years?
So, good question. No, so I think that people stereotype. Firstly, things are changing quicker than they ever have, and that's not because people are changing. It's because the technology is changing and the way that we consume information is. So I think probably the change for brand, the actual change, is that it's now bigger in terms of there's more ways that you interact with a brand. So 10 years ago, my phone wasn't nearly as smart, and there were, a relatively limited number of touch points. So I think the brand marketer's job has kind of got tougher because there's this broader range of ways of engaging. I don't think that's necessarily led to some sort of change in the customer having some, high-end love, appreciation of brands or complete disdain for brands. I think they equally kind of care about brands, and most of the time don't care about your brand. But I think it's just made it a slightly more complicated job, if that makes sense.
I would agree with that. The one thing I would say though, I think what brands stand for has become really important. I think especially with Generation Z, they want transparency. They want you to be real, and they want you to stand by what you say, and they will call you out if you don't do that. So I think that's definitely been a change that I've seen in the last kind of 10 years. Yeah, and they also have a larger voice. Sorry.
Yeah. Authenticity, really. I think that's one of the things you're saying, isn't it? You have to be authentic with your voice, and the marketing that doesn't work, brands that don't work, it's very often because there isn't an authenticity sitting behind it. It's back to talking about values and what you're really about, and meaning it and acting it out.
Ted, have you seen with your clients a change in their kind of briefs and demands, particularly in property and placemaking, over the last decade?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say that specifically over the last few years, the debate around brand of a building itself and the distinction between branding a building or the brand of the service provider of that building is probably the biggest kind of conversation that's come about over the last few years. And I think different providers have different views and takes on it. So specifically about, yeah, where does brand sit within property is around actually the building itself as well. For me, that's been the biggest conversation.
Ted, I think that is critical because, you know, you have to start at a building level, because essentially, I mean, I'm speaking really from a build to rent perspective with everything I'm talking about today, but, you know, you have to start because it's a local product, it's localized. And, you know, even if you are an operator with a dozen buildings in different cities, you know, the odds are that, you know, if you're in Edinburgh, you don't care about the building in Leeds. So, you know, the building level and buildings get reputations, you know, good and bad locally. So you have to start with brand building, I think, at a localized building level, but also because, you know, in build to rent particularly, this is such a young industry, and, you know, nobody has really got a brand yet on a national scale that would be recognized. So, you know, that will only come in time.
Yeah, I agree, Graham. And I think that fundamentally starts with the naming of the building. You know, as we've said, the brand is way more than just the logo, but it does also start with the name, because an identity is built around the name and where that name's come from. And also going back to trying our best to create brands and experiences that are authentic, it does and can start with where that development's come from, or literally the foundation from which it's arisen, you know. And we're finding more and more actually that investors are really cottoning on to the fact that the name has to be thought about right at the beginning, before even planning and permissions have been made. If they get the name wrong right at the start, it can have repercussions all the way down the line.
Soraya, what's your view? I mean, you've worked for some really big brands, and each property has its own name and its identity. You know, where do you think the customers sit in that?
It's an interesting one. I think when you're having, I mean, I agree with everything you've said. I think it does begin on a local level. However, I have seen the value of having a global brand. So, for example, we have buildings across the UK, and we recently went to operate buildings in the Netherlands. And we had a student come and book in one of our buildings in the Netherlands, in Groningen, because he lived in Nido, Newcastle. And he had literally come to us and said, oh my God, I saw Nido was here and I had to book with you because I had such a great experience in Newcastle. So to him, it didn't actually matter, you know, about the building, the name. He just kind of associated the brand and the experience he would have and the quality that he would perceive to have from what he'd already experienced, and moved countries and recommended his friends to also come and live with us. So it's, I guess there's no one size fits all. I think it's, you know, international students, if they're kind of only researching online, they wouldn't have a chance to physically visit the building. They want some trust. They'll be looking at the scale and, you know, where else you are and what else you're doing, you know, so it won't just be about that one building. So I guess there's various facets to it.
Yeah, it also depends on what your objective is as a building owner or investor, because, you know, if you are basically doing a one-off building, or you're building to stabilize and sell, you know, you're far less interested, if at all, really, in the brand development. But, you know, if you're building a platform and, you know, such as Nido, whether that's UK or European or global, then that becomes much more important. And I think we'll see, you know, over the next 5 years, you know, we're going to start to see who the real players are, you know, at a, you know, a platform brand level. And for those people, you know, in particular, you know, the brand is going to become more and more important. But, you know, if you're simply wanting to create a great building to sell on, then it's back to, you know, a sort of building level branding that's important, I guess.
Simon, we're talking, your focus is obviously Gen Z, and that's how they start in PBSA, but then flow through into the build to rent sector. What kind of attitudes to brand would you say that Gen Z has that might be different to other demographics?
I think so. In these things, the fashionable thing to say is the brand purpose is everything, right? I don't think that's necessarily quite the case, but I think there's a role for it. I'd be really interested as a slight outsider to know, not to answer your question with a question, but whether there are examples that you're aware of building providers that are talking about kind of social issues that are related to property. I guess like there's some big issues around gentrification. I wonder whether everyone's shy away from that. Let's talk about mental health and that we're going to create a lovely space. Or is there anyone that's actually willing to talk about those big issues? I'm just interested to put it to the group. But I think to come back and answer your question, I think there aren't like dramatic behavioural differences between Gen Z and other kind of generations. I just think that the way that they engage with you has changed, and the way that they source their information has changed. So I definitely wouldn't rule out a kind of platform move, like some sort of allegiance to a WeWork style thing without all the bad aspects of it for accommodation, and that bit driving a really strong brand. I definitely think that there's an opportunity for that.
You talked about purpose, and that's a great question. Do any of the other panelists want to answer that? No. No, I mean, I think from our point of view, it's difficult, especially in PBSA, because the audience is so diverse. It's a lot of international students and their purpose and kind of, I guess, the ethics behind it might be quite different to a demographic student. You've got students from all over the UK studying lots of different things. You've got different ages, really. So well-being is still very much a focus. So if we just take that aspect, for example, Ted, Soraya and Graham, what kind of impact does well-being have on a brand? Is it a brand? Is it a sub-brand? Is it part of the brand?
It's part of the brand. Sorry, go ahead.
Part of the brand, yeah.
It definitely is. I would say it's very much part of the brand, or should be part of the brand. And going back to Simon, what you said about purpose, I think purpose is super important for a provider. I'm fortunate enough to have worked with providers that genuinely care about the people that are going to be in their building and the experience that they're going to have living there. And they look to add value wherever they possibly can. And they do look to what those people are going to want in that building. So to have that ingrained in the purpose in the first place, that's the point of what they're doing, is super important for sure.
I think it's, again, wellness. It's a buzzword, isn't it? Really. So, how meaningful is it? This is the key. Everybody's talking about what does it mean. To some people, it just means we're putting a gym in the building. And in fact, now actually we're having conversations with certain clients about actually whether we put a gym in the building at all. Is that really what we want? So, wellness is a much bigger subject. It's about nutrition. It's about fitness. It's about interaction. Our business, the Live business, was sold to Cortland in August of 2019. And Cortland is a multi-family operator in the US based in Atlanta that owns and manages almost 70,000 apartments. Now, obviously, that is a completely different scale to anything that we've got here in the UK. But, within that business, they employ a medical doctor. They have nutritionists, they have somebody who is producing fitness regimes that is being fed out through all of the different communities. It's being taken to a very serious level because they regard it as part of the experience. Now, clearly you can't do that if you simply just have 200 units in a building. But I do think that the question isn't just about wellness. It's what does that really mean?
Yeah, I agree. I'm sorry.
There you go. I was just going to say, and also, what does it mean to our customers, right? And I think we have to keep reflecting back and asking them what they want, and then kind of adapt our offering accordingly.
I think that's so important. And, again, in the build to rent sphere, when we're operating buildings, we're constantly surveying residents. I'm sure you are at Nido, at every single touch point from, move in through to move out and everything in between. And that's how you learn, it's the engagement with our residents that, talk about how do brands develop? Well, they develop by listening to their customers and learning from the customers. And that's what we need to do much more. And, there's so much yet to be done. We're at the very beginning of a journey in build to rent. The PBSA sector is much further ahead. And, how much I'm looking even behind you, at your backdrop there, 10 years ago, a student residents would not have looked like that. It's all emerging from what we're learning.
Just to take it away from the customer just for a minute, what impact can a brand bring, do you think, to stakeholders, investors, and the kind of the more B2B audience? Soraya, what's your view on that? And obviously you've had to deal a lot with the investor side of things.
I mean, I think it can massively increase the value of the company overall. I mean, as we grow, as you build the brand, you get more market credibility, you get that quality of service, the trust. It allows you to expand the business. It's definitely allowed Nido to go into new jurisdictions. You get higher sale prices of exit when investors do decide to sell, but we could also command higher prices. As you build that market credibility, you're allowed to increase your rents because there's a higher perceived value associated with the brand and what you're going to be offering, and customers will be willing to pay more for it. And then alongside that, you will have, customer loyalty, you'll have customers who refer, so you can overarchingly reduce your customer acquisition costs, which again will add value to the investor. So building a brand has massive benefit. And I touched on the employee part earlier, but again, we shouldn't miss that, because the brand does empower employees, it inspires them, it motivates them. And that's what we should all as businesses be striving to do. To create communities for our customers and for our employees.
I think it's such a good point, forgetting about the employee brand. Ultimately, your brand is if we define it as the experience that your customer has, that is just defined by the space, which is one thing that's controllable, but ultimately actually not that controllable. And your staff, they're the only things that you can control. So the staff, the employee brand is something that I think, unless you're a huge organization, always gets forgotten about, basically.
Yeah, and if you haven't got that bit right, you've got a problem, haven't you? Because, everything filters down from, the people that are working both in your front office and in your back office, basically. So, I completely agree with that. I think that, there's not enough thought being given to, particularly in the build to rent sector, in terms of the people that are working, in the front of house, basically. And, this is largely a young audience. They want to work inside cool businesses. And you only have to look around at all sectors. The successful businesses are spending an awful lot of time and money on getting that aspect right.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry.
I was just going to pause for a second, because I can see we've got a few questions. Deanie, is there anything that's relevant that we should target straight away?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've got loads of great questions here. Thank you, guys. From Ellis, we have, how do you think the categorization of property asset classes plays into branding? Will categories like build to rent and PBSA become more widely understood and important in how customers understand residential offerings, or will they remain principally investor or industry terms?
I think that is a great question. And it's one of the big challenges that we have. I think the answer is that the consumer is not going to respond ever, in my view, to the term build to rent. I should imagine almost anybody has a clue what PBSA means if you go out on the street. We have to find better terminology and better ways of describing, particularly, again, if the build to rent sector, it's so new. Most people have had no experience of it. They don't know what it means. If they're a renter or have experience of renting, it's probably with a private landlord. They would not understand the terminology at all. Inside our business, we've coined the phrase resident first living. And that's simply because that's what we believe. You know, we don't have tenants in these buildings, you know, we have residents, and these people come first. It's their experience that counts, and those are the guys that are paying the bills. So yeah, you know, it's really, really important. And I think that forever as an industry we'll be using this terminology. We just have to find a better way of communicating to consumers, to our customers. Great question.
I think you're 100% right. I think no young person will ever care whether you call yourself a PBSA or a build to rent. Like, they just care about what can you offer them. And I think that opens up an opportunity that, you know, you might be in the PBSA space, but you can also then have a build to rent arm which is under the same banner, and they understand your values and what you buy into as a service, regardless of the specific product that you're buying right there and then.
And I guess the question is kind of, how do you think this is my question, sorry. How do you think kind of the build to rent and co-living things work together? Are they one and the same? Are they something different? Is co-living something that consumers can get more behind?
I think, again, you know, do people understand what co-living is? You know, I always describe co-living as really being the step from, you know, being a student, you know, and before you become more grown up and going to build to rent. So, you know, it's definitely a different proposition, because it is more akin to a student, and it is much more about, you know, being a part of a young community. Whereas I think when you get into build to rent, you've probably got, you're slightly further down the line, you've got perhaps a more slightly serious career and job, and you need a bit more of your own space. They can work successfully alongside each other. I'm sure it's only a matter of time before we start seeing developments coming forward that have got, you know, one element is co-living, another element is build to rent, and people will be able to move from, you know, one to the other. So at the end of the day, it's all about accommodation. It's how we put it together. And that comes back to brand again.
And another good question we've got through from Sally about what do you think about sub-brands? So obviously, you know, there's obviously a national brand that you have a sub-brand. So for example, Liberty Living will have all their building names under individual names, but there's the word Liberty in every name. So you capture the local brand and global brand attention. Like, how do you feel about kind of brand hierarchy and how you develop that?
I think, again, yeah, that's a very good question, and very much a hot topic at the moment. And I think it is possible to put forward essentially two brands. What you're talking about is, you know, an overarching provider, if you will, a service provider that has, you know, brand equity, as we've identified, brand recognition. But we also want to create an authentic brand for the building itself. And I think the two can live together as long as they're thought about in the same context, that they can live together.
I've got a very specific example, Deanie, about that. If I use my US experience, because the Liv's parent group, Cortland, went through a process only over the last couple of years, really, where they did some research which determined that, in fact, having the Cortland name on a building mattered greatly, and improved responses that they were getting to different marketing channels. So they went through a process of rebranding. It's still ongoing because it's such a huge portfolio, but they've gone through a process of renaming all the buildings so Cortland appears everywhere. But Portland comes first, the building name comes second. And in fact, in Watford, which is Cortland's first UK build to rent scheme, the development is called Cortland Castlebury. So and that will follow through. And I think we'll definitely see more of that. Again, you know, the master brand becomes much more important as you grow. It's less meaningful to consumers, you know, initially, but, you know, it's about starting the process, I think.
What about sub-brands when it comes to different product offerings? So, for example, you know, do you think it would work if in PBSA, for example, you had maybe a budget value brand and a more premium brand, but you had something connecting the two? It's not really been done yet, but I think there's space in the market, you know, for that kind of offering.
And I think it's something we've been discussing for the last 5 years or so, right? And nobody's done it yet. But you know, it's still a discussion which we have, especially when you are expanding. And you know, the strategy is to expand. So you're buying, you know, new buildings, but you're also buying possibly distressed portfolios. And how do you make that align? So I think there could be a place for it. What we've done is to make our brand values led rather than product led, to allow us to diversify and you know, work across different types of assets. But yeah, we're not there yet in creating different brands. I think it would require more resource, of course. So yeah, it's something which we'll keep on the table though.
Hotels have done it successfully, haven't they, for years? So it's going to happen.
Deanie, are there any more questions on the subjects that we've just talked about, or shall we move on?
I think let's move on and we can answer any other questions we haven't answered.
Okay, so next question is about sort of communication. And as Deanie discussed earlier, there are clearly people in our industries that don't value brand and marketing maybe as we do. Have you ever experienced people in your organisations that don't understand brand value and what it can do for your business, and how have you overcome that?
I go. I think I've been very fortunate that senior leaders across the businesses I've worked at have always bought into marketing. However, I think it's fair to say finance always question what we're doing and why we do it. And there's a thought that, you know, whatever tactical marketing you're doing, they can understand because it's going to drive those leads. But the brand building, they always question. And I think it's about demonstrating the value that it can bring, and it touches on everything that I said before, you know, being able to demonstrate that you can increase rents, you know, increase the value of the portfolio itself, etc., etc. So I think it's just being able to communicate and articulate what it can do, and obviously have the metrics to support that.
Yeah, I think that's super important, and we can actually evidence that brand building has a direct impact on sales. You just need time to be able to demonstrate that. So at the beginning of the launch of an asset, you probably need 3 or 4 months of brand building before you can then start to show directly that it correlates with lead generation. For example, we see we put a lot of emphasis on brand building through social media activity that then starts to have an impact on paid search results a few months down the line, because you start to see brand search becoming more and more relevant and effective in the paid search results, which is obviously direct lead generation. So I think it's just being able to show those data sets, and then some people that maybe haven't got it in the past start to understand the true value of it.
So it comes back down to sort of commerciality and data, really, potentially, to persuade non-marketing people that brand is important. Do you think that as marketeers we have the responsibility within the company to educate the rest of the organisation about this? And Graham, we've been talking a bit off camera before about it. I know you had some thoughts on it.
And I'm forever surprised, really, that, you know, we have to educate people all about brand. I mean, I get it, because, you know, and I spend a lot of my time, you know, with people who are on the finance side and the investment side, and, you know, and of course it is, you know, about return on investment, and Soraya was saying as much. But you know, I think that the evidence is all around us. You know, if we don't have to look very far before we see the evidence of successful brands, and, you know, how they're driving value, you know, into business. And it's just that we're at a very early stage in property generally. I think has never been perceived. You know, I mean, even if you look at the sales side of property, you know, there's relatively few, you know, national brands that you could talk about. But you know, when you start looking at build to rent, it's so small in number. So I think, you know, we do have a responsibility, yes, but ultimately it's only hard evidence that is going to basically drive more understanding of the value. And hard evidence actually is, I think, in building terms, will come down to more about retention of people living there. You know, I always maintain that, you know, if you get your marketing strategy right, your launch marketing for a building, actually, you know, it's going to take a little bit of time depending on where the building is, but you're not really going to be too challenged in terms of the leasing up of that building. Your challenge is in actually holding on to people. And that's where the brand becomes important, and what that brand means, and everything that we've been talking about around the great experience that we have. Because if you give people a great experience, if you delight those customers, your residents, they're going to pay more rent, they're going to recommend you, and they're going to stay in the building.
So what would you say to those people in your organisation? Say, well, people are just choosing the product because of where it is. It's all about location.
I'd say they're probably right most of the time, actually, to be honest. You know, got to be honest about this. I think, you know, location is still the single biggest driver. However, you know, if you have a strong brand, you are able to perhaps, you know, test newer locations more easily. And by the way, there is no better example in the property sector than Urban Splash when it comes to that. When you see what Urban Splash did in going into some of the ropiest areas in the country, frankly, and, you know, creating, you know, great product. And I'm sure to this day, they're in the second-hand market, their apartments will be changing hands, you know, at a higher value than other competitors will be, because the people respect the brand. So it can be done, but location is still very, very important.
I guess with PBSA, Soraya, it's so competitive. They've got high concentration of buildings in the same location. So surely with PBSA, you can't put it down to location, because they could choose anyone.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's when you have, you know, 5 buildings all in a similar location, all with a similar room type, price point, common space, then what is it that makes them choose one over the other? And I think that's exactly when brand does come in. It's that feeling they got when they, you know, and all the touch points that they had. It's when they were in your building or saw your building. It's what what they could imagine themselves living with you. That's why they then choose you over the other four or five. So I think that's when brand definitely makes a difference. But I also think it's just never as black and white. I mean, as humans, when we do make purchases, it is the irrational part of our brain that makes that purchase. It's the limbic brain. But when we're trying to explain why, we kind of rationalize the decisions. So then we start to say, no, it's location, or, you know, it's because it's got a really great gym. But actually, that's not what drives the purchase. And I think it's just a human thing that we're just not very good at articulating why we do things, particularly when it comes to our feelings. Because you're never going to get a student to say, I just walked in and it felt like home, and that's why I chose it. They're always going to look for the other things. And we never include that in surveys. We always say, oh, was it the location? Was it the common space? But maybe we should start going deeper and really understanding feelings, because that is what drives purchase decisions.
But Soraya, that's one of the reasons why the people in the buildings are so important, isn't it? Because, you know, they are your brand ambassadors, and if they make a connection with your prospective resident, you know, they've probably got the biggest influence, certainly a bigger one than whether they like the gym or not.
I mean, how far, I mean, does reputation go? I mean, I said, Simon, you've probably seen a lot of reaction to that in the last year with Gen Z and what brands they're engaging with based on maybe reputation of how they've been communicating and kind of sort of varying their offering over the last year. So how can a brand influence reputation, or reputation influence brand probably?
Yeah, I don't really see them as separate, to be honest. I think your brand is essentially your reputation, and reputations can turn very quickly. I think one of the talking about that, actually, I thought Ted mentioned, you know, that balance of the local building brand versus the umbrella, you know, the big organization brand. You know, one of the challenges of having a big organization brand is if it turns sour and you mess up, you've messed up on a big scale, as opposed to one building messing up. So I do think that I can't really distinguish the reputation and brand. I think they're kind of one of the same, basically, and that's how you measure your brand work. The other thing that I would say, just on coming back to the point that Graham said about kind of like how we justify spending money on brand to finance people, I think we actually need to look at ourselves a little bit. I think I was looking at your the role of marketing survey, and, you know, it was interesting that actually just providing sales was relatively lowly ranked, in my opinion. Like, that is, for me, that the entire reason of building a brand is, you know, if it's not generating sales at some point or generating rebookings, then we might as well pack up and go home. So I think we need to look at ourselves and be able, like, you know, we need to be able to have these commercial discussions so that then we can answer properly to finance.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess that comes back round to the kind of the investor communications and what me and Deanie are trying to do and elevate marketing within a business. And it's far more, we've just discussed, you know, for the last 45 minutes, it's far more than just the logo and the creative side of things, and it's got to come back to the commercial aspect of it. Deanie, are there any questions on the section that we've just been discussing?
Yep, from Sally, we've got, who do you think should own a brand? The most senior marketer or the senior management team?
All of them.
Everyone should own the brand.
Everyone. Yeah, very much so.
Sorry.
No, all good.
And I just had a question back to Ted, what you were saying earlier about that process of building a brand, you know, then has an impact 3 months down the line when you actually go out to sales. Yeah. Do you think, you know, digital marketing has done great things for marketing in terms of actually being able to track what we're doing and what we're achieving, what results we're getting? But do you think the payoff for that is that actually many of the finance departments don't miss that bit around, actually there's a slight downtime when you're building that brand that's not going to have that impact? And has that been one of the negatives around digital marketing, I guess?
Yeah, I would say so, specifically around pumping money into social media that isn't necessarily going to link directly with leads or sales. It's a much harder job to say invest thousands of pounds a month into great content that's going to resonate with your audience in those early months to help you build that relationship with your audience. Yeah, undoubtedly it's difficult to do, but yeah, the proof is in the pudding, I guess.
I think it's the most common mistake, isn't it? Is that you run a set of ads which are acquisition based, get a good conversion rate, and you're like, right, let's put all the money into that. Great. Then 3 months later, suddenly your acquisition rate isn't as good anymore because you've got nobody going in at the top of the funnel. And then you've got an awkward conversation because your social ads aren't working, are they? Which were perfect 3 months ago. So I think it's just such an obvious mistake, and that's like, it's how you rationalize, like, how do you account for stuff that you can't measure is really, really difficult, and a really difficult argument to have with finance.
Yeah. Agreed.
And that's where I think probably the entrepreneurial businesses will score. And I use Moda again as another example of an entrepreneurially backed business who had the vision, and, you know, they invested early, and, you know, in that whole, particularly social media. It's much harder to get that message across and to get the you know, the financial sign off inside an institutional business, I think.
Totally. I think that starts to then align with the long-term objectives built into that organization, and I suppose sometimes what is the juxtaposition, if you like, is an investment portfolio has a shelf life where they may want to build a building, get it full, and sell it a few years down the line. But if you're in it for the long term, as we've seen demonstrated by brands over the last 40, 50 years, those that want to be here in the long term will invest in brand and get the value of that, and get that they will reap those rewards further down the line, which I guess is slightly a different mentality for the way people have viewed property over the years up until now, as what we're seeing.
I think Soraya made a good point earlier on about, you know, the value that gets built into brand, and, you know, that we're certainly going to see this in the build to rent sector. You know, the real wall of money for build to rent isn't in forward funding individual buildings. You know, the money is waiting for stabilized assets, and, you know, there is going to be a real focus on the quality of the operational businesses that are in our space, and with it the brands and those with, you know, quality brands that, you know, are recognized and are meaningful and relate to, you know, basically creating a great product and service for people who are staying in those buildings will command higher values, absolute certainty. So, you know, the finance people, you know, I have to be careful what I say because a lot of them are my clients, really. So you're all wonderful and visionary, but you know,
we do have a future session planned of kind of how marketing and finance can work together. So it seems like there's quite a few questions around that we can come back to. Have we got any other questions, Deanie, on this part of the webinar?
No, I think let's move on. So. Okay,
so then the last part is about the future. So how do you all think that brands will evolve in the future? What are people going to look for?
I think probably one of the most interesting things to look at about this is we're talking primarily about build to rent or student developments that start out with a certain set of amenities that are then built. You know, they're informed by hopefully what we think customers will want, or what indeed we know customers will want. But what happens when that starts to change? Because you've built a physical space and you've built a physical environment. So I think the interesting thing is to start to think about the future in terms of how a space is going to change and evolve physically as well, which obviously still has a huge impact on brand, because the physical experience is such a huge part of the brand experience. So kind of building buildings that can become flexible or have spaces that can become flexible, I think will be how the future will go.
Yeah, I agree. And I think brands will have to be more agile and be able to adapt to the changes rather than be stuck on kind of their values or their proposition as it is. So exactly that. But I also think it's already much harder to stand out from the noise. So I think brands have to invest more time in being able to resonate with customers on a deeper level. So we have to kind of invest more in that, and that point of being more real and authentic is going to be key in giving customers a place to be heard. I think that's the biggest thing I've learned in this last year, that's the main thing that they want, is to be heard. And that's why they take to social, and you know, we've all probably experienced that in some way. But it's how you manage that can change everything, and that's what we have to invest in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I remember when I worked on my very first build to rent scheme quite a number of years ago now. In fact, two of the people I worked on, I noticed, are actually participating in this presentation who I worked with on it. And you know, back then, you know, having a gym, having a resident lounge, it was a wow, you know, it was a feature. You know, these things are just givens now. And I think in terms of how the brands are going to evolve, then you have to come back to, you know, the word that I'm probably overusing, which is experience. You know, it's about experiences, and it links to, you know, we talked about Gen Z? I'm not very good on all my terminologies like that. I know it's not me, that's for sure. But you know, I mean, I have two children who are sort of Gen Z, and you know, for them, it's about experience, it's about lifestyle, it's about instant gratification, it's about having it on demand. You know, it's about a choice, and you know, people will move quickly, and there'll be less you know, trusting, and I think trust is really important. So we've got to evolve brands that people have trust in, and that create really good experiences, you know, for people, which actually means looking after people. You know, it's not rocket science.
Simon, how do you think you can engage with customers in the future? What are they going to be?
So yeah, building on what Graham's saying, I think trust is such an important thing, and I think you've basically got two ways to earn trust. One is be perfect all the time and always make perfect decisions according to absolutely everyone, which is great. Or be fully transparent and show your motives and be brave. And I would guess entirely from the outside that as a sector that is often led by investors, that bravery to be fully transparent is probably, I guess, harder to come by. But I think it's not unimaginable. Like, I think 5-10 years ago, I couldn't imagine a bank building itself publicly, but Monzo basically did that. You can read everything that they're working on. You can see their sprints that they're working on, that their tech team is building. And I think that level of transparency is the thing that will actually drive trust, as opposed to, you know, trying to pretend that you're perfect, because you will mess up at some stage, basically.
Okay, so I know Graham's mentioned Moda a few times. You just mentioned Monzo. Soraya and Ted, are there any brands either in property or outside of property that you think we need to be looking at for the future?
I guess me and my team, we're fans of the student hotel. We love seeing kind of what they're doing, the whole blended aspect. How they communicate with their different audiences is also really clever. So I think, you know, they're ones that we look at anyway. And it's good to see kind of how they work across the different platforms.
Ted?
Rather than a specific brand that I'd like to see coming out in the future, I think it's often like the and I hate to sound really cliche, but it's often the disruptors or the challengers out there that come out of left field and introduce something completely new that has huge value is what I think we're going to see, or what I'd like to see. And I think as you know, as technology becomes even more ingrained in our day-to-day lives, you know, I'm wearing an Apple Watch that my wife bought me for Christmas. I wouldn't have thought of buying myself one, if I'm honest, but I'm finding some of the benefits as I'm using it. And I think we're going to see technology woven into buildings more and more and more, and just as humans, how we interact with technology. So I think we're just going to see a lot more of that.
Great, thank you. Deanie, are there any questions on the future section we just covered?
No, I don't think so.
That's great. Well, we're going to wrap up now, unless our panelists have got anything else that they would like to add. And we could probably have gone on all afternoon, to be fair, but we have to let everyone get back to their jobs.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
That's brilliant, and as always, you know, we chat a lot in these sessions, which is good, and we even got through the whole session without talking about COVID, which is a good segue into the fact that our next session will be on COVID, so there'll be lots of discussions on COVID, but it has been nice to have an afternoon without a mention of the word or unprecedented, so thank you. As I say, our next session will be on the 19th of May. It's sponsored by CGI Design. We've got some of the biggest players in the PBSA sector talking about how the last year has changed kind of marketing forever, what's going to stay, what's not going to stay. So will be a really great discussion. If you've got a topic you'd like to discuss, please let us know. And if you're interested in sponsorship, I'd like to be a guest, please drop Sarah and I an email. We have recorded this session, so we're putting this on our website over the next couple of days. So if you want to share with your colleagues or watch again, then you'll be more than welcome to. And finally, just a reminder that in addition to our full consultancy services as the Property Marketing Strategists, we also offer a bite-sized service. So if you've got kind of a small question and not quite sure what you want, and it's flexible, kind of you know, limited on budget or time, then that's a service for you. And to kind of celebrate our launch and the great engagement we've had from everyone, if you've signed up to this webinar or our previous webinar, we'll be offering a 20% discount on those services. So there hasn't been a better time to come and chat about brand and how we might be able to help you kind of now or in the future. So finally, just a big thank you to everyone who has attended. Thank you to all our guests. That was brilliant. And hopefully you'll come back to our sofa again sometime. And thank you very much.